Good morning. This is Brother Larry coming to you from the Southampton Baptist Church. We welcome you this morning to our online Sunday school class. We have been studying the past several weeks of what we call shadow Christians. And if you're not familiar with that term, should you be the first time you've tuned in this morning, shadow Christians are those that work in the background, that don't work in the limelight, the spotlight. They're not the pastor, they're not the music leader. They may be the janitor, for example. They may be one who decorates a church, or one who just comes in early, makes sure the light's on, the heat's turned on, or the air conditioner's on. But people work in the background. And we've been looking at that for the past several weeks. This morning we're going to look at our title of our lesson is The Shadow Christians, We Who Do the Dirty Work. Now, when I talk about dirty work, I'll define a little bit later on, in just a very few minutes. But if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 8 and kind of mark your spot, and also in Acts chapter 9, we'll be looking at those sections of the scripture this morning. But we talk about the dirty work. We're not talking about necessarily, when you use the term dirty, sometimes it has a negative connotation. Let's put it this way. I've been married about 56 years, and I've raised 4 children. It didn't take me long as a young parent to understand that somebody had to clean up the dirty diapers and somebody had to clean up the vomit. Now, that's usually the kind of dirty work we talk about when we think about dirty work, and that's necessary work. Any young parent understands how necessary it is to do some dirty work. We don't use that term necessarily when we refer to the church. We talk about it. But what we're talking about, those jobs are done behind the scene. Perhaps the jobs that no one else wants or everyone else turns down. The nuts and bolts of getting the ministry of the church done, it may seem very insignificant to most people. But somebody has to do that work for the church to carry off this function, whatever it might be. For example, this morning we have someone in the sound booth making sure that we're up and online, that my mic was working properly and everything was together so that we could get started this morning. Now, we're a little bit late, obviously, but for reasons beyond our control, we got started late this morning. So we talk about this type of work that's necessary to be done. And we talk about, when I talked about young parents, that maybe that's more information you wanted to know, but it's necessary work. The family won't function. The family won't be what it can be and should be. Children won't be taken care of properly unless someone's willing to do what? Clean those poopy diapers and clean up the vomit when the child gets sick. So that's what we're referring to. But all church ministry has a type of dirty work. Maybe not like I just said about parents, but it's there. Somebody has to vacuum the rugs. Somebody has to sweep the carpet, sweep the floors, clean up the bathrooms. All that's got to be done if it's going to be done at all. Someone has to provide the child care in the church. Somebody has to work in the nursery. Someone may have to monitor the parking lot in some of these big churches to make sure that cars aren't broken into. Someone may have to monitor the hallways of the church as people are coming and going in services. Not too long ago we saw on television where a woman came in and tried to attempt to shoot up a church, and it was those who were out there monitoring the hallway who were able to prevent it in the very beginning and stop it from occurring until the police could arrive and give them more help. But somebody has to do all that kind of work. No matter if someone takes on a leadership role in the church, you may be in the background, but somebody has to do the nuts and bolts of carrying out the ministry of the church that often is not seen by the people who sit in the pew, maybe not even spoken about by the person doing it, but it has to be done for the church to carry off its function. Now, these ministry needs are extremely important for the church to carry off what it needs to do, otherwise it couldn't get accomplished. Sometimes what we call the shadow Christians, those that work in the background, will often take the job that no one else wants or no one else cares to do. And I was thinking this morning before I came to the Sunday school lesson about some of the wrong reasons to choose to do work in the church. And one of those most prominent in my mind, I think, is the years I pastored, even here as interim pastor years ago, and in Montana as a home missionary. That person says, I'm going to do the job because no one else will do it. That's perhaps not the best reason to do a job. I've always felt through those years a person needs to feel a call of God to do whatever the job is, no matter how insignificant or how big it is. But there are those times I've heard people say, well, I'll do it if no one else does it. I would kind of say that's not the appropriate way to do a job, but sometimes the church functions because no one else will do that, and they just step up because no one else will. I'm going to ask you 2 questions this morning I want you to consider. There are 2 questions that I want you to consider. And this first question is, have you ever said someone ought to fix or paint or arrange or clean something? Have you ever asked that question? Perhaps you have. across the years of my ministry, I probably have done it. Others have done it too. But the second question is far more important. And that is, what did you do about it? Did you just keep asking the question, or do you step up in some form or fashion, take care of that particular need that needed to be done? That's where shadow Christians step up and do what needs to be done. Now, the writer talks about, here he asks the question about what's the most important position on a team. And the writer talks about he was a little league coach. He'd ask his players, what's the most important position? Would they say, was the pitcher or the catcher, the first baseman, the outfielder, some of that sort was playing shortstop? And he would always answer. He'd answer then. It's the position you're playing. And what is he saying? What's the writer trying to say? He's saying that every position is important. Every position has to be functioning correctly on a little league team for the team to be a winner. And he takes that concept and moves it right over into the church the same way that the most important job in the church is the job that you're doing, whatever that job might be, because everybody has to do their job, organized together to function in a way the church can carry off the work it needs to do. So that's what I want to say to you. You may see yourself as an insignificant person in the church. May you see your job as insignificant, perhaps, and you may be that shadow Christian we're talking about, but your job is just as important as any other job in the church, whether you're in the limelight or not in the limelight. Now let's read out of Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 through 16. And this is recorded here. It's about Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. It's the context here. It says, when Jesus came to Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her. She got up and began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with his word and healed all the sick. This was fulfilled. It was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and cured our diseases. Now, we have described here a woman that's Peter's mother-in-law. Jesus and the rest of the ministry team show up at her house. They find her in bed sick. It appears like it's probably early in the morning because the rest of the context talks about evening. And it says Jesus touched her and she was immediately healed. Now, here's what I want to point out to you when that occurred. We talk about that occurred right there. Her response to Jesus' healing was immediate. If it had been in our day and time, she probably would have called someone on the phone or called some TV station, or her friends would call the TV station. She probably went on a tour talking about what Jesus had done for her. But that's not what we see here. What we see here is she gets up and begins to minister to Jesus and begins to minister to the team that he brought with him. Because it says here, she got up and began to wait on him. Now that, we don't know exactly all that she did, but the context seems to appear several things were done here as we talk about this. We don't even know this woman's name. She's just characterized by the fact that she's Peter's mother-in-law. And sometimes, as we point out, I said earlier, in churches, the shadow Christians, you refer to her as kind of a shadow Christian, we don't know their names. We don't know who they are. We might not even realize what they're doing necessarily because it's not being pointed out. Here in the scripture, we find being pointed out. She gets up, she begins to minister to those around her. As we look at it there, we find her ministering to him. Now later on, here's what we think she was doing, because it says later on, when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits of word and healed all the sick. And so what we think was occurring here, she probably got and fixed a meal, perhaps 2 meals. Her house became a place for Christ to be located and to do his ministry. She was a woman who was hospitable to Jesus and the ministry team, and so she became a necessary part of what he did there, and driving out the demons and healing the sick. He had a base of operation. He probably had 1 or 2 meals a day, and perhaps he might even slept during the day before that evening came around, took a nap, or at least quite possibly maybe even stayed the night there. Scripture is quiet about that, but we do know that she ministered in some form or fashion to Jesus, and that allowed him to carry out the mission that he was there for. So that shows the importance of what we call the shadow Christians. What little she did, what we kind of think that she did, made it possible for Christ to get a meal, be restful, and carry off his ministry that evening. So that's the importance of shadow Christians. If you're one of those, understand how important your role is in the church. We find another one listed here. We go a little bit farther over, but that's what she has done here. We talk about what shadow Christians have to do is perhaps like she did. Someone has to set the tables, cook the meals, or clean the floors, or bust up the table when it's all over with, wash the dishes, vacuum the rugs that we talked about, haul out the trash. Somebody has to do that. Rarely does a pastor do that unless it's a small church. I'm not saying he can't do it or shouldn't do it, but it's usually the folks that are there to help him do the ministry. For example, when on Sunday mornings I come in here early, I make sure the lights are on. The heat's either up or down, whether it's summer or winter. The Sunday school material is where it's supposed to be. The attendance sheets are passed out. Those are all things that I do before everybody gets here. So when it gets time to be Sunday school, they can kick itself off without any problems whatsoever. It's not here to say anything important about myself, just doing jobs that need to be done. And a job that, in general speaking, the pastor should not have to worry about doing. And so those are the things I've done for years here, and it comes to that kind of thing. So this hard work that she did and the hard work that Shadow Christians did become important to carry out the ministry. Here's another thing we want to talk about, and it's in our day and time. It's very unfortunate we need to talk about this, but what we call protective services in the church. We read increasingly, we see on the news and hear about churches are being, even churches or synagogues or even schools being attacked, by some shooter. And churches are starting to get more and more of that happening to them. And so someone has to patrol those churches on many occasions. Someone has to patrol the parking lot. Someone has to make sure that when a worship service is going on, that the worshipers are safe and secure. And no one's going to try to come in and harm them. That's the protective services that Shadow Christians often provide in our day and time, for example. And so even when we come to what we call checking children in, and even checking the Sunday school workers who work with children, I know we go on a mission trip every summer here out of Marion County. One of the things that has to be done, if you go on a mission trip, you have to have a background check. Are you, because you're going to be around children, BBS or other types of things, but a background check. Are you the kind of person that might want to cause some harm out there on the mission field? And so we're routinely checked as to what kind of individuals we are, and can we be safe around these young children. That's also done by Shadow Christian in the sense we talk about that. So we look at that. Now, there's another one recorded in Acts chapter 9, verse 22. So let's quickly turn over there. We talk about protective services. This one I'm really kind of familiar with. But in Acts chapter 9, verse 22, we'll find this recorded. It says, "Yet Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus, proving that Jesus is the Christ." Excuse me, I got one page too many here. I got a new Bible, my pages are sticking together. Supposed to be in that, but I say Acts chapter 9, verse 22 and 25. Let me go back there and get it again. I lost track. Said after many days had gone by, the Jews had conspired to kill him. But Saul learned of their plan. Day and night they kept close watch on the city gates in order they might kill him. But the followers took him by the night and lowered him in a basket through the opening in the wall. And so here we find another instance where shadow Christians are providing protection for Saul. Saul goes to Damascus on Damascus Road. He's struck down. He comes in, and Christ says, "Why are you persecuting me?" And that whole process, Paul becomes a believer in Jesus Christ, ends up in Damascus, begins to preach the truth of Jesus Christ, and the Jews there begin to devise a plan. How can we get rid of this man? How can we shut him up and get others not to say the same thing? So they devise a plan to kill Paul. And the plan was to have the Romans who have Paul at that time say, well, let's bring him to the authorities there, the Jewish authorities, so we can ask him more questions. And when he gets out on the street and they're bringing him there, we're going to kill Paul. But the only problem is Paul's nephew hears about this whole this plot and reports it to the Roman authority who's in charge of Paul at that time. And so they want to silence Paul because he's baffling them about the truth of Jesus Christ, who he is, and they can't seem to fight against that. And so they intervene and they protect Paul's life. We find other times of that sort. When they hear that Damascus, that's when they let him down. They let him down the wall and he gets out of the city. But in Acts chapter 22 is when I referred to about the Romans having Paul. And that's where the nephew protects Paul by going to the Roman government. Now, why is that important? Well, Paul's life is spared. Paul continues to do his ministry. Paul ends up in Rome doing a ministry at Rome and bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to Rome. But one of the most significant things is this. If you count the books in the New Testament, you'll come up with 27 books. We know for a fact, without doubt, Paul wrote 13 of those. Now, Paul had been killed in this conspiracy we think about. Would we have had those 13 books? Open the question, isn't it? God intervened in this marvelous way to ensure that Paul's life was not taken. But he didn't intervene in a sense of he himself intervened. He had these shadow Christians intervene and protect Paul's life, at least to these two occasions we'll look at here. And so he even got his nephew involved in it. So Paul lives to write these 13 books that we've talked about here in the New Testament, out of the 27 that are there. And so that's an important thing that these shadow Christians did. So 2 Sundays ago, I talked about another thing that the shadow Christians did. 2 Sundays back, we were in Mark chapter 11, and we talked about the fact, it's a session 11, we talked about the fact that Christ is in a house ministering. The crowd is surrounding him. The people are outside and cannot get inside. And 4 men bring a man on a litter who's paralyzed. And they eventually go up on the roof of the house, and they break through the roof, they cut through the roof, and lower this man down in front of Jesus. And so that was, again, what shadow Christians, ensuring their friend got to Jesus and Christ could heal him. And so shadow Christians play such an important role we find here in the New Testament. The role is just as important here in the world that we live in today as the church carries on its ministry today. So it's important we understand if you are a shadow Christian, it's important what you do. Now let me summarize the lesson we talked about. We do this dirty work, and I don't mean when I talked dirty work earlier, I'm talking about this nuts and bolts down on the ground where the rubber meets the road, as my dad used to say when I was younger. But where the rubber meets the road, that's where these shadow Christians, and we do the work of the church. We take the tough jobs sometimes that not even anyone else care to do or not even thought about. We see it, and we see it's a job we can do, and we take that job and we do it. We might prepare the meals. We might bust up the tables, take the trash out, clean the rugs, sweep the floors, clean the restrooms, walk in the parking lots, walk in the hallways, make sure the church is safe and secure. And we do these kind of jobs because the job needs to be done. Willing to do the ministry that we carry, the church ought to do that. We make sure whatever needs are done in the church, we make sure they're done. We step up and take that position so we can do it. Now, if you're a shadow Christian, you may not be proud of what you're doing. You may think nobody cares, nobody's pat you on the back. I mean, that's not the reason you would do it, but nobody seems to acknowledge what you're doing or understands what you're doing or why you're doing it. And sometimes you just feel like nobody cares about that. But I'm here to tell you, if you're among that number of shadow Christians, be proud that you are, because you are the soldiers of the Christian church. You're the ones that carry off the work. You're down there, as I said, the rubber meets the road, and without the shadow Christians there, the work wouldn't get accomplished. The pastor can't do it all. Music directors, the director of education. It takes everybody in the church doing the task. And sometimes these tasks are out of sight, out of mind. Others are more prominent. But if you're a shadow Christian, be proud that you're in that group, because they ensure this work of the church is done. So I thank you for tuning in this morning. We're going to start a new study next week, go on for several weeks, and may you have a God-blessed day.